Have you ever been discarded at a luxury party by the family you served your entire life? On New Year's Eve, they called me expired, but they did not know that expired was simply the moment I stopped enduring their abuse. It took just one phone call for their entire logistics empire to begin falling apart, piece by piece, exactly in the order I had arranged. My name is Mila Coleman, and for the last 12 years, I have lived inside a Bluetooth headset. I do not sleep. I stand by. I do not eat. I refuel. I am 41 years old, but in the logistics industry, age is not measured in years. It is measured in mileage, in cortisol levels, and in the number of catastrophic failures you have personally averted while the rest of the world is popping champagne. Tonight was New Year's Eve. The entire world was preparing to count down to a fresh start. But the maritime shipping industry does not care about the calendar. The ocean does not take a holiday, and neither does Caldwell Harbor Logistics. I was standing in the master suite dressing room of the Caldwell estate on the main line of Pennsylvania. The room was expansive, lined with custom cherry wood cabinetry and smelling of lavender and old money. Outside the frosted windows, snow was falling on the manicured lawns, a picture-perfect winter scene. Inside, I was fighting a war. My dress, a floor-length emerald silk gown that had cost $4,000, was half-zipped. My hair was pinned up in a way that looked effortless, but had taken an hour to style, but my focus was entirely on the voice in my ear. "Do not tell me the chassis is unavailable. Mike," I said. My voice was low, lethal, and steady. I did not scream. Amateur scream. I operated with the cold precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. I am looking at the yard inventory report right now. I see 3 genset-equipped chassis sitting in Sector B. They have been idle for 6 hours. Mila, look, the union guys. They're already clocked out for the... I do not care if they are halfway to the bar. Mike, I cut him off. That container is carrying temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals, insulin. If that internal temperature rises above 2 degrees Celsius, the entire shipment is ruined. That is a $2 million loss. Do you want to be the one to call the client and explain that you let life-saving medicines spoil because your guys wanted an early start on the party? Or should I make that call and give them your home number? Silence on the other end. Then, the sound of rustling paper. Sector B, you said? Sector B, chassis number 409. Get a driver in the cab. Now. You have 20 minutes before I escalate this to the Port Authority and report you for that safety violation I kindly overlooked last month. On it. Jesus. Mila, you don't let up. Happy New Year, Mike. I tapped the headset, switching lines instantly. I did not have time to breathe. The crisis at Port Newark was a hydra. You cut off one head, and 2 more appeared. The reefer container, a refrigerated shipping unit, had suffered a compressor failure while waiting for customs clearance. The broker had dropped the ball. The trucking company was ghosting us. It was a perfect storm of incompetence, and I was the only umbrella. Tony, I said, greeting the next voice before he could even say hello. I secured the chassis. I need your driver at the gate in 10 minutes. Not 15. 10. Mila, it's New Year's Eve. My guys are... Double time? I said. I am authorizing double time and a $500 cash bonus if the load is plugged in at the warehouse by midnight. Send the invoice directly to my personal email. I will approve it tonight. Do we have a deal? You're a magician, Mila. Dealing. I am not a magician. Tony, I am just the only person who reads the contracts. Go. I tapped the device off. The silence that rushed into the room was deafening. For the first time in 40 minutes, I looked at myself in the full-length gilded mirror. The woman staring back at me was impressive. She looked powerful. The emerald silk draped perfectly over her frame. The diamonds at her throat. A gift from my father-in-law. Everett, 5 years ago for securing the Amazon contract, glittered under the recessed lighting, but if you looked closer, past the silk and the stones, you could see the truth. My skin was pale, not porcelain fair, but the kind of pale that comes from 12-hour days under fluorescent office lights. There were shadows under my eyes that concealer could hide but not erase. My hands, resting on the vanity table, were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. I felt like an engine that had been running at redline for a decade, vibrating with a phantom hum even when the ignition was cut. I was 41. I felt 80. "It is done," I whispered to the empty room. I took a deep breath, forcing my lungs to expand against the tightness of the dress. The crisis was averted. The insulin would be safe. The client would never know how close they came to a disaster. The company's reputation remained bulletproof. And now, I could be a wife. "Tonight is different," I told my reflection. "Tonight, you are not the COO. You are not the fixer. You are Mila Caldwell. You are family." I finished zipping the dress, wincing slightly as the fabric pulled tight. I applied a final coat of lipstick, a shade called Power Red. It felt less like makeup and more like war paint. I put on my heels, checked my phone one last time. 0 missed calls. Everything moving as ordered, and walked out of the sanctuary of the dressing room. The hallway was quiet, lined with portraits of Caldwell ancestors, severe men with mutton chops and pocket watches who had built this empire on railroads and coal. Now, it was built on my back, on my ability to navigate the digital chaos of modern supply chains. I walked past them, feeling their painted eyes judging me. They never liked me. I was not from their world. I was the daughter of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. I worked for my place at the table. I earned every inch of ground I stood on. As I reached the top of the grand staircase, the noise hit me. It was a physical wave of sound rising from the foyer below. The smooth, complex rhythm of a live jazz quartet, playing a generic, upbeat standard. The clinking of crystal flutes, the roar of laughter, the low hum of gossip. I paused at the top of the stairs, looking down at the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. There were maybe 100 people down there, the elite of Philadelphia and the main line, investors, partners, local politicians, old money socialites who had never worked a day in their lives. They were drinking vintage champagne that cost $300 a bottle. They were eating canapes topped with caviar imported from the Caspian Sea. Every sip they took, every bite they ate, every note the band played, it was all paid for by the containers I moved. It was funded by the crises I solved while they were getting manicures. It was sustained by the fact that I knew the difference between a bill of lading and a commercial invoice, and they did not. I scanned the crowd, looking for a friendly face, looking for Owen. I found him near the fireplace, standing under the massive oil painting of the harbor. My husband, Owen Caldwell. He looked devastatingly handsome in his midnight blue tuxedo. He had that Caldwell look, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair that sat perfectly in place no matter the weather. He was holding a tumbler of scotch, laughing at something his father was saying. Everett Caldwell stood next to him, the patriarch, the chairman. At 70 years old, he was still a formidable presence, though he spent more time on the golf course now than in the boardroom. He was the face of the company. I was the brain. I watched them for a moment, a pang of longing striking my chest. They looked so comfortable, so easy. They were father and son, sharing a joke, sharing a legacy. I wanted to be part of that circle. I wanted Owen to look up, see me on the stairs, and smile. I wanted him to mouth, "You look beautiful," or "Come here." I started to descend. 1 step, 2 steps. My hand trailed down the polished mahogany banister. I walked with the practiced grace of a woman who had learned to hide her exhaustion. Head high, shoulders back, smile fixed in place. I reached the bottom of the stairs. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne. I took a glass, not because I wanted to drink, but because I needed something to do with my hands. "Mila!" It was not Owen. It was a board member, a man named Henderson. "Good to see you, Mila," he said, his face flushed with drink. "I heard we had a little hiccup at Port Newark earlier. Everything under control?" News traveled fast, but Henderson didn't look worried. He looked like a man who knew the mechanic was on duty. "It is handled, George," I said, my voice smooth. Just a minor scheduling conflict. The cargo is rolling. Of course it is, he chuckled, raising his glass. That is why you are the best. The Iron Lady of Logistics, eh? He patted my shoulder, a gesture that was patronizing and appreciative all at once, and drifted away. The Iron Lady, the workhorse, the fixer. I had a dozen nicknames, and none of them were beloved wife or cherished daughter. I made my way through the crowd toward the fireplace. The heat from the logs was intense, but the atmosphere around Owen and Everett felt colder. Owen saw me coming. For a second, his eyes met mine. I waited for the warmth. I waited for the recognition. Instead, his gaze flickered away, shifting to the floor, to his drink, to anywhere but me. It was a look of avoidance, a look of guilt. No, Owen wasn't capable of guilt. It was discomfort. Owen, I said, stepping into their circle. Everett, Happy New Year. Everett turned slowly. He held his glass by the stem, swirling the amber liquid. He looked me up and down, but not with pride. It was an appraisal, like he was checking the mileage on a used car. Mila, Everett said. His voice was a deep baritone that commanded attention. You are late coming down. Work. Everett, I said, keeping my tone light. Newark had a situation. I had to ensure the pharmaceutical contract didn't breach. Always working, Everett said. He didn't say thank you. He didn't ask if I was tired. He just shook his head, a small, tight smile playing on his lips. You do love the grind, don't you? I love protecting this family's assets. I corrected him gently. I turned to Owen, touching his arm. The fabric of his tuxedo was cool under my fingers. You look nice, Owen. Owen pulled his arm away. It was subtle. He made it look like he was reaching for a napkin, but I felt the rejection in my bones. Thanks, Owen mumbled. He didn't look at me. He looked at his father. Dad, it's almost time. Yes, Everett said. Yes, it is. Everett stepped away from the fireplace and walked toward the center of the room. He grabbed a silver spoon and tapped it against his crystal glass. Cling, cling, cling. The sharp sound cut through the jazz and the chatter. The room fell silent. The band stopped playing. 100 faces turned toward Everett Caldwell. I stood by the fireplace, a few feet behind him. This was the ritual. Every New Year's Eve. Everett gave a speech about the year behind us and the year ahead. He would talk about growth, about legacy, and usually, at the end, he would gesture to me and Owen, acknowledging the next generation. I straightened my spine. I was ready. I had earned this moment. I had just saved them millions while they drank. I was ready to be acknowledged. Friends, family, colleagues, Everett began, his voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. Thank you for being here. Another year has passed. A year of challenges, yes, but a year of triumph. Polite applause. Caldwell Harbor Logistics has stood for 70 years. Everett continued. We have weathered storms. We have navigated changes in the market. But the key to survival is not just endurance. It is evolution. He paused for dramatic effect. The room was rapt. You cannot run a modern empire with antique machinery, Everett said. You cannot win tomorrow's race with yesterday's horse. I frowned slightly. This was different from his usual boilerplate speech. Everett turned. He pivoted on his heel and looked directly at me. For a moment, I thought he was going to introduce me. I prepared my humble smile, but his eyes were dead. There was no warmth. There was no family. There was only the cold, hard calculation of a businessman cutting a loss. The room followed his gaze. Everyone was looking at me. Mila, Everett said. He didn't lower his voice. He spoke clearly, so every person in the room, the investors, the rivals, the staff, could hear every syllable. We have made a decision regarding the future of this company's leadership. My heart hammered against my ribs. Something was wrong. The air in the room seemed to vanish. We are moving in a new direction, Everett said, his voice flat and final. We will replace you with someone else. I blinked. I felt like I had been punched in the throat. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at him. "Excuse me?" I whispered, though in the silence, it sounded like a shout. Everett took a step closer to me. He smiled. But it was a cruel thing, a baring of teeth. "You are too old, Mila," he said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Too old. I was 41. I was in the prime of my career. I was the reason this company functioned. "I don't understand," I managed to say, my voice trembling. I looked at Owen. "Owen?" Owen finally looked at me, but he didn't step forward. He didn't defend me. He didn't look shocked. He looked relieved. He looked like a man who was glad the Band-Aid had finally been ripped off, even if it took a chunk of skin with it. He said nothing. Everett laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "It is simple, my dear. The market wants youth. It wants energy. It wants a face that looks like the future, not the past. You have done adequate work, but you are tired. You look tired. And frankly, you do not fit the image we are building for the next quarter century." He gestured to the crowd, inviting them to agree with him. "You are expired," Everett said. I stood there, the champagne glass still in my hand. I felt the blood draining from my face. I felt the eyes of 100 people burning into me. They weren't looking at me with sympathy. They were looking at me like I was a car wreck, like I was something broken on the side of the road. The jazz band was silent. The waiters were frozen. In that moment, everything slowed down. The heat of the fire, the smell of the expensive perfume, the sight of my husband's cowardly silence. Expired. I repeated the word. It wasn't a firing. It was an execution, a public execution in a ball gown. Everett turned back to the crowd, dismissing me as if I were already gone. "But do not worry. We have already secured your replacement, and let me tell you, she is a breath of fresh air." He didn't care that I was still standing there. He didn't care that he had just humiliated me in front of the entire industry. He thought I would just take it. He thought I would cry, run away, and fade into the night. He thought I was just an employee. He had no idea that he had just declared war on the only person who knew where all the bodies were buried. I tightened my grip on the champagne glass until I thought the stem might snap. I did not run. I did not cry. I stood my ground, and I listened. Because if they were going to throw me away, I was going to make sure I remembered every single detail of how they did it. Too old, I thought, the shock beginning to curdle into something hotter, something darker. I looked at Owen one last time. He was sipping his scotch, his eyes fixed on the chandelier, pretending I didn't exist. Okay, I thought, if I am expired, then I have nothing left to lose. And a person with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world. The word expired did not just hang in the air, it traveled backward through time. It burrowed into the last 12 years of my life and rotted them from the inside out. Standing there in my emerald gown, paralyzed by the public humiliation, my mind did not scream, it rewinded. It went back to the days when my hands were not manicured, when my heels were scuffed boots, and when Caldwell Harbor Logistics was nothing more than a regional trucking company with 20 rusty tractors and a mountain of debt. I remembered the day I officially joined the company. It was not in a boardroom. It was in a dispatch office that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and diesel fumes. Back then, the Caldwell empire was crumbling. Their drivers were robbing them blind on fuel costs. Their scheduling system consisted of a whiteboard and sticky notes that frequently fell on the floor. They were bleeding money, and Everett Caldwell was too proud to admit he did not know how to stop the hemorrhaging. I was the one who installed the GPS tracking systems on the fleet, fighting tooth and nail with the old guard drivers who threatened to quit. I was the one who fired the warehouse manager, a drinking buddy of Everett, after I found him selling inventory out the back door. I sat in that cramped office for 18 hours a day, rewriting the routing algorithms by hand until we saved 15% on fuel in the first quarter alone. I built the discipline that held this family up. I created the standard operating procedures. I wrote the strike contingency protocols that saved us when the port unions shut down the East Coast in 2018. And what did I get in return? I got the illusion of inclusion. I remembered my mother's 60th birthday party. It was a milestone. My sister had planned it for months. A dinner cruise on the Delaware River. I had paid for the open bar. I had promised I would be there to give the toast. But 2 hours before the boat launched, a customs broker in Savannah flagged a shipment of aerospace parts due to a paperwork error. It was a $3 million contract. Owen was supposed to be handling that account. He was the vice president of client relations, a title Everett had invented to give his son something to do that did not involve heavy lifting. But Owen was at a golf tournament in the Carolinas and was not answering his phone. So I missed the boat, literally. I sat in my car in the marina parking lot, watching the dinner cruise drift away, watching the lights reflect on the water, while I screamed at a customs agent until my voice went hoarse. My mother told me she understood. She said she was proud of my success, but I heard the disappointment in her voice. I never got that night back. I missed my 5th wedding anniversary dinner because a driver overturned a rig on I-95, and I had to coordinate the cleanup and the PR spin to keep the Caldwell name out of the headlines. Owen ate the dinner alone at the restaurant and charged it to the company card. When I got home at 2 a.m, smelling of stress sweat and exhaustion, he was already asleep. I missed the funeral of my favorite uncle because a strike at the rail yards threatened to bankrupt us. I stood in the back of the church vestibule, not praying, but negotiating a backdoor deal with a union rep to get our critical freight moved. I was wearing black, but I was not mourning. I was working. Every time I sacrificed a piece of my personal life, Everett would put a heavy hand on my shoulder and say the same thing. You are blood now. Mila, you are a Caldwell. We do what we must for the legacy. Blood, that was the currency they paid me in. Not equity, not ownership. I remembered the time, 3 years ago, when I finally asked for my name to be added to the partnership agreement. I had just landed the exclusivity deal with the largest automotive manufacturer in the country. It was a deal that doubled our valuation overnight. I sat in Everett's mahogany-paneled study and laid out the case. I did not ask for a salary raise. I asked for 5% equity. Just 5%, a token of ownership for the woman who ran the machine. Everett had laughed. It was a warm, grandfatherly laugh that made you feel small for even asking. Oh, Mila, he had said, pouring me a brandy I did not want. Why complicate things with lawyers and taxes? You are Owen's wife. What is his is yours. We are a family, not a corporation. Putting your name on the papers, it is just administrative clutter. Trust me, you are the heart of this house. I believed him. God help me. I believed him. I thought that being the heart meant I was vital. I did not realize that the heart is just a muscle that pumps blood to the brain. And Everett and Owen considered themselves the brain. The truth was, Owen could not run a lemonade stand, let alone a logistics firm. There was the Green Fleet initiative he launched 4 years ago. He wanted to replace our entire diesel fleet with electric trucks before the technology was ready for long-haul routes. He signed the contracts without consulting me. 6 months later, we had $10 million worth of electric trucks sitting dead in a lot in Ohio because the charging infrastructure did not exist. Who fixed it? Who negotiated the buyback clause with the manufacturer? Who spun the story to the shareholders as a strategic pause rather than a catastrophic failure? I did, and when the quarterly report came out, Everett patted Owen on the back in front of the board and said, "My son, the visionary, always ahead of the curve." They moved Owen to human resources after that, giving him a corner office where he could approve vacation days and pick out the holiday gift baskets. They kept him away from the operations, away from the money, and away from the decisions that actually mattered. I became the firewall that kept the business from burning down every time Owen had a good idea, and yet, the snide comments never stopped. I remembered a dinner party just last month. I had come straight from the office, still wearing my blazer, my phone buzzing on the table. Everett looked at me with that fake concern, his eyes glittering with malice. "You know, Mila," he had said, slicing his steak, "you look so tense. A woman's beauty is like a flower. It wilts under too much fluorescent light. Perhaps you should take a step back. The most beautiful thing a wife can do is stand gracefully in her husband's shadow, supporting him with silence and peace. I had forced a smile. I had bitten my tongue. I told myself that he was just old-fashioned. I told myself that as long as I delivered the numbers, as long as I kept the ships moving and the trucks rolling, they would have to respect me. Competence was my shield. If I was indispensable, I was safe. But standing in that ballroom, with the words, "too old," ringing in my ears, the shield shattered. I realized with a clarity that was colder than the winter air outside that they did not love me. They did not even like me. They loved the profits I generated. They loved the crises I averted. They loved the fact that I allowed Owen to play the role of the successful businessman without having to do the work. They loved my labor, but they despised my presence. To them, I was not a partner. I was a high-end appliance. And like any appliance, when it starts to show signs of wear, when it starts to make a little noise, you do not repair it. You replace it with a newer model. I looked at Owen again, my husband, the man I had shared a bed with for 12 years, the man I had defended, protected, and propped up. Surely, he would say something, surely, even if he was weak, even if he was afraid of his father, he would have enough basic human decency to say, "Stop," to say, "This is my wife, and she has given everything to us." I watched him. Owen was staring into his glass of scotch, as if the answers to the universe were floating in the amber liquid. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He knew this was coming. That was the realization that cut the deepest. He knew. He must have known for weeks. He had watched me stress over the port strike last week. He had watched me buy this dress. He had kissed me on the cheek this morning and wished me a happy new year. All the while, he knew that his father was planning to butcher me in front of our friends and colleagues. He had let me walk into the slaughterhouse. His silence was not just cowardice, it was an active participation in my destruction. Everett was the executioner, holding the axe. But Owen? Owen was the one who had tied me down to the block. I felt a tear prick the corner of my eye, hot and stinging. I willed it not to fall. I would not give them the satisfaction of my grief. I had given them my youth. I had given them my energy. I had given them my loyalty. I would not give them my tears. The flashback ended. The memories of 12 years of servitude snapped shut like a heavy book. I was back in the ballroom. The music was still dead. The crowd was still staring. Everett was smiling, waiting for me to leave. Owen was still looking at his shoes. And inside my chest, the heart that they claimed was the center of this family stopped beating for them. It hardened. It turned into something unrecognizable. If they wanted to talk about expiration dates, fine. But they forgot one thing about logistics. When you cancel a contract with a critical operator without a transition plan, the entire supply chain collapses. They thought they were just changing the locks. They did not realize they were demolishing the foundation. I took a breath. It was the first breath of my new life. The silence that followed Everett's declaration was not the respectful silence of a church. It was the morbid, voyeuristic silence of a traffic accident. The crowd of 100 wealthy guests stood frozen, their crystal glasses halfway to their mouths, their eyes darting between me and the patriarch of the Caldwell family. They were waiting for the crash. They were waiting for me to scream, to beg, or to shatter. Everett did not give them time to process the brutality of what he had just done. He was a showman, and he knew that to sell a lie, you had to keep the audience moving. He clapped his hands together, a sharp, violent sound that broke the spell. "But let us not dwell on the past," Everett announced, his voice booming with forced conviviality. "As I said, to survive in this economy, a company needs a face that speaks to the new generation, a face that understands the digital heartbeat of the modern world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new Chief Operating Officer of Caldwell Harbor Logistics, my new daughter-in-law, the wife of my youngest son, Piper Caldwell." The double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. I expected a professional entrance. I expected a woman in a power suit, perhaps carrying a portfolio, looking nervous but determined. Instead, I saw a ring light. Piper Caldwell walked into the room holding a portable tripod with a blindingly bright LED halo light attached to her smartphone. She was 25 years old. She was wearing a dress that was less of a gown and more of a series of silver sequins held together by hope and double-sided tape. She was not looking at the guests. She was looking at her screen. "Hey guys," Piper chirped, her voice pitched an octave higher than natural, addressing the invisible audience on her phone rather than the flesh-and-blood billionaires in the room. "We are live right now at the Caldwell Gala. Look at this fit. Look at this room. We are about to make some major moves tonight. Drop a heart in the chat if you love new beginnings." She walked toward the stage, her eyes glued to the scrolling comments on her stream. She did not make eye contact with the board members. She did not acknowledge the investors. She was live streaming her own coronation to an audience of teenagers who likely could not afford the shipping on a pair of sneakers, let alone a container of industrial steel. I watched her approach, feeling a mixture of nausea and disbelief. This was my replacement? This was the person Everett believed could manage a fleet of 300 trucks and international customs clearance? Piper bounded up the steps to the small stage where Everett stood. She finally looked up, flashing a smile that was perfect, white, and completely empty. She hugged Everett, careful not to smudge her makeup on his tuxedo, and then turned the camera to face the crowd. "Okay, everyone say hi to the stream," she commanded. A few confused guests waved awkwardly. Henderson, the board member who had praised me 5 minutes ago, looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Everett beamed. He looked at her like she was a golden goose. "Piper, tell them your vision. Tell them where you are taking us." Piper handed the tripod to a waiter as if he were a piece of furniture and took the microphone. She giggled, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "So," Piper began, tucking a strand of platinum blonde hair behind her ear. "When Everett asked me to take over operations, I was like, wow, logistics. It sounds so boring, right? Like, just boxes and trucks?" She paused for laughter. There was none. "But then I thought about it," she continued, her voice taking on a breathless, mock-spiritual tone. "Logistics is not just moving things. It is energy. It is flow. Think about it. When you order a dress, or a vitamin, or a new phone, you are waiting for happiness. You are waiting for fulfillment. So logistics is really the emotion of boxes." She looked out at the crowd with wide, expectant eyes. "We are not moving cargo. We are moving vibes. And under my leadership, Caldwell Harbor is going to be the most aesthetic, high-vibe shipping company on the East Coast. We are going to curate the supply chain." Someone in the back coughed. It was a loud, wet cough that echoed in the embarrassed silence. Then, slowly, painfully, people began to clap. It was the polite, terrified applause of people who realized the emperor was naked but were too rich to say so. "The emotion of boxes," I repeated under my breath. The sheer idiocy of the statement made my head spin. Everett took the microphone back, looking triumphant. "Thank you. Piper, visionary, truly visionary." He turned his gaze back to me. The warmth vanished from his face instantly. "You see, Mila," Everett said, addressing me across the 10 feet of polished floor that separated us, "this is what we need. You were a workhorse. And do not get me wrong, a farm needs a workhorse. You pulled the plow, you got dirty, you kept your head down, and for that, we thank you." He did not sound thankful. He sounded like he was discussing an old tractor that was leaking oil. "But a workhorse is not a racehorse," Everett said. "And eventually, the workhorse gets tired. It gets slow. It gets expired." The word again, expired. The crowd turned to look at me. I could feel their judgment physically, like a weight pressing down on my shoulders. They were not looking at me as the woman who had saved their investments. They were looking at me as a discarded object, a piece of furniture that had gone out of style. I saw pity in some eyes, but mostly I saw relief. They were relieved it was me and not them. Piper stepped forward then. She took her phone back from the waiter and walked right up to me. She held the phone up, the ring light blinding me for a second. "Oh my God. Mila," Piper said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Do not be sad. You look so stressed." She tapped the screen. I saw my own face appear on her phone, but it was wrong. My eyes were huge and alien-like. My mouth was distorted. She had applied a filter, a funny filter. "Look at you," Piper giggled, staring at the screen, not at me. "You really need to sleep, babe, and maybe look into some collagen supplements. I have a discount code if you want it. Seriously, your frown lines are kind of intense right now." She was broadcasting this. She was broadcasting my humiliation to thousands of strangers. She was turning the end of my career, the destruction of my life, into content. I looked past the phone. I looked past the blinding light. I looked for Owen. He was standing 10 feet away. He had heard everything. He had heard his father call me a farm animal. He had heard his sister-in-law mock my appearance and my age. "Owen," I said. My voice was calm, but it cut through the room. Owen flinched. He looked up. His eyes panicked. He looked at the camera. He looked at his father. He looked at the floor. "Owen," I said again, "are you going to let them do this?" He swallowed hard. He opened his mouth, and for one heartbeat, I thought he might redeem himself. I thought he might step forward and knock the phone out of Piper's hand. "Mila," Owen said, his voice weak and watery, "don't make a scene. Please, let's talk about this later. You're being dramatic." Dramatic. The final nail. He was not just a coward. He was a collaborator. He would rather watch me bleed out on the floor than risk an awkward moment with his father. Something inside me snapped. But it was not a loud snap. It was the quiet, precise click of a lock disengaging. I turned my attention to Everett. I did not shout. I did not scream. I spoke with the authority of a woman who had run this room from the shadows for a decade. "You are making a mistake, Everett," I said. Everett chuckled. "I think the market will disagree. You are replacing a chief operating officer who knows the maritime law of 40 countries with a child who is filming me with a filter," I said. "You are handing the keys of a billion-dollar logistics network to a woman who cannot distinguish a shipping manifest from a commercial invoice." The room went deadly silent. I saw Piper's smile falter. She lowered the phone slightly. "I know what an invoice is," Piper snapped, sounding like a petulant teenager. "It is the paper with the numbers." "It is not just paper with numbers, Piper," I said, my voice cold. "It is a legal declaration of value. If you get it wrong, the cargo is seized. If you get the HS code wrong, the company is fined $10,000 per container. Do you know what an HS code is, Piper?" Piper blinked. Her mouth opened and closed. I have a team for that." "You had a team," I corrected her. "I was the team." I turned back to Everett. "She does not know the difference between a TEU and an FEU. She thinks logistics is vibes. You are not building the future. Everett, you are building a disaster." Everett's face turned red. The vein in his forehead pulsed. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "We do not need your technicalities. Mila, we need youth. We need relevance. Piper has 2 million followers. That is power. That is the future. You are a relic. Now, get out of my house before I have security throw you out." He waved his hand at me as if shooing away a fly. I stood there for 3 seconds. I memorized his face. I memorized the smug look on Piper's face as she raised her phone again. I memorized the pathetic slump of Owen's shoulders. "Very well," I said. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond ring on my finger was heavy. It was a beautiful ring. Owen had given it to me, but Everett had paid for it. Everything in this life was leased. Nothing was mine. I slid the ring off my finger. It left a pale band of skin where it had sat for 12 years. I turned to Piper. She was holding a flute of champagne in her free hand, looking at me with a smirk. "Here," I said, "for your content." I dropped the heavy diamond ring into her champagne flute. Plink! Champagne splashed over the rim. Dripping onto her hand and her sticky silver dress, Piper shrieked, jumping back. "Ew, my dress!" she cried. "It is a gratuity," I said. "You will need it when you bankrupt this family." I reached into my clutch. I pulled out the key fob for the company Mercedes I had driven here. The car I had thought was mine, but was just another tool they let me use. I did not hand it to Owen. I did not hand it to Everett. I simply opened my hand and let the keys fall to the floor. Clatter. The sound was sharp against the hardwood. "I return everything," I said, my voice steady, my eyes sweeping the room, daring anyone to speak. "I want nothing from you, not your money, not your name, and certainly not your pity." I looked at Owen one last time. He was staring at the ring in the champagne glass, looking like he wanted to fish it out. "Goodbye, Owen," I said. "I hope the shadow you stand in keeps you warm." I turned my back on them. I walked toward the grand double doors. My head was high. My heels clicked a steady rhythm on the floor. I could hear Piper gasping behind me, asking if she got that on camera. I could hear Everett muttering curses. But I did not stop. I did not look back. I walked out of the ballroom, past the portraits of the dead ancestors, and out the front door into the freezing night. I was alone. I was empty-handed. I was expired. But as the cold wind hit my face, I realized something else. I was free. The heavy oak door of the Caldwell estate slammed shut behind me. The sound was not a click, it was a thud. A final, reverberating noise that signaled the end of my life as I knew it. I stood on the front porch. The overhang offered a few feet of shelter, but beyond the pillars, the Pennsylvania winter had turned vicious. The snow had melted into a freezing, sleeting rain that slashed sideways through the air. I was wearing an emerald silk gown with no sleeves, no back, and no warmth. My coat was inside. My purse, thankfully, was a small clutch I had held onto, but it contained very little. I reached for my phone, the company-issued device I had used to command fleets and move mountains. I pressed the side button. Nothing. The screen remained black. It was not a dead battery. It was a remote wipe. Everett had it on standby. In the time it took me to walk from the ballroom to the front door, they had bricked the device. They had severed my connection to the world before I even stepped off the property. It was efficient. It was brutal. It was exactly the kind of protocol I had written for terminating high-risk employees. I was now the security threat. I shivered, the cold already biting into my bare arms. I walked down the stone steps, my heels slipping on the wet slate. I needed to get to the car. I had dropped the keys inside. Yes, but I had a spare key hidden in a magnetic box under the wheel well. It was a habit from my days managing truck drivers who locked themselves out constantly. I ran through the rain toward the guest parking area where I had left the silver sedan. The icy water soaked my dress instantly, turning the expensive silk into a heavy, freezing second skin. My hair, pinned up so carefully hours ago, plastered itself to my neck. I reached the car. I fell to my knees on the wet asphalt, ruining the dress completely, and felt under the wheel well. My fingers, numb and shaking, found the small black box. I pulled the key out. I stood up and pressed the unlock button. The lights did not flash. The lock did not click. I pressed it again. Harder. Nothing. I tried the manual lock on the door handle. It turned, but the door would not open. The engine immobilizer had been activated remotely. Then I remembered. The lease. I had negotiated the fleet lease agreement myself 3 years ago. All senior management vehicles were leased through a subsidiary of Caldwell Harbor. The contract stated that upon termination of employment, the lessor retained the right to immediately disable and recover the asset. I was not the owner. I was just the authorized user, and my authorization had just been revoked. I stood in the pouring rain, staring at the car that I had driven every day, the car that had taken me to meetings, to hospitals, to the grocery store. It was just a hunk of metal now. It was a coffin on wheels, and I was locked out. "Okay," I whispered. The wind stole the word from my mouth. "Okay." I turned away from the car. I could not stay here. If I stayed, security would come out. They would drag me off the property, and Piper would film it from the window. I would not give them that footage. I began to walk. The driveway of the Caldwell estate was 1/4 of a mile long. It was lined with ancient oak trees that blocked the streetlights, plunging me into darkness. I walked in the mud on the shoulder to avoid slipping on the ice. My heels sank into the earth. I took them off and carried them. Walking barefoot on freezing mud was better than breaking an ankle. I reached the main road. A gas station shone in the distance, a beacon of neon blue and red. I walked toward it, my body shaking so violently that my teeth chattered in a rhythm I could not control. I made it to the station. The attendant, a teenager with headphones around his neck, looked up as I stumbled in. A wet, barefoot woman in a ruined evening gown. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just stared, then went back to his phone. I went to the back corner of the store, near the coffee machines. I opened my clutch. Inside, I had a small tube of lipstick, a compact mirror, and a backup phone. It was an old model, a cracked smartphone I kept for emergencies, mostly for when the primary network went down during storms. It was a burner, in the sense that it was not connected to the Caldwell server. It had a prepaid SIM card. I turned it on. The battery icon showed 12%. I had to move fast. I opened the banking app for our joint account. The account Owen and I shared. The account where my salary had been deposited for 12 years. I had never separated my finances. Why would I? We were married. We were a team. I logged in. The Face ID failed because I was shivering too much. I typed the passcode with trembling fingers. The dashboard loaded. Available balance. $0.00. I stared at the screen. I refreshed the page. 0. A notification at the top of the screen showed a transfer history. Transfer to O, Caldwell Personal Savings. Completed. 45 minutes ago. Owen had drained it. He had logged in while I was upstairs dealing with the crisis at Port Newark. While I was saving his family's reputation, he was stealing my livelihood. He left nothing, not even enough for a cab. I felt a scream rising in my throat, a primal sound of rage and betrayal. But I swallowed it down. Screaming cost energy. I had no energy to spare. I checked my credit cards. Blocked. Canceled. I was stranded in the middle of Pennsylvania with no car, no money, and no coat. I had one option left. I dialed my mother's number. She was in a specialized care facility in Delaware. It was an expensive place, the best in the tri-state area. She had early-onset dementia, and she needed 24-hour care. I paid the bills. Or rather, the bills were paid automatically from the family trust as part of my compensation package. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Hello? Her voice was groggy. It was late. Mom, I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. It is Mila. Mila? She sounded confused. Is everything okay? It is late. Honey? I had a bad night. Mom, I said. I leaned against the cold glass of the soda refrigerator. I need help. I need a place to stay for a few days. Can I come to the facility? Can I sleep in the guest suite? There was a silence on the other end, a heavy, terrified silence. Mila, my mother whispered. Everett called me. My blood ran cold, colder than the rain. When? I asked. 10 minutes ago, she said. Her voice was shaking. He said there were changes at the company. He said that the funding for my room. He said it is discretionary. He threatened you, I said flatly. He said that if I harbor any disgruntled former employees, it would be a violation of the trust agreement. My mother was crying now. He said he would have to move me, Mila. He said the state facility is very crowded this time of year. The monster. He knew my mother was my weak point. He knew I would sleep under a bridge before I let her be moved to a state-run facility with inadequate staffing. He had checkmated me before I even made the first move. Mila, what is happening? She sobbed. I can't leave here. I don't know where my things are. I get confused. It is okay, Mom, I said. Tears finally spilled over, mixing with the rain on my face. It is okay. Everett is just being difficult. Do not worry. But do you need a place to stay? She asked, her motherly instinct fighting through the fear. No, I lied. No, I am fine. Owen and I just had a fight. I am going to a hotel. I have plenty of money. I just wanted to hear your voice. Are you sure? I am sure. Go back to sleep. Mom, everything is fine. I love you. I love you too, honey. I ended the call. I slid down the refrigerator door until I was sitting on the dirty linoleum floor of the gas station. I hugged my knees to my chest. I had no husband, no job, no car, no money, and now I had no family I could turn to without destroying them. I looked inside my clutch again. Hidden in the lining was a $20 bill and a $10 bill. $30. Cash I kept for tipping valets. That was my net worth. $30. I stood up. I used $5 to buy a bottle of water and a cheap, scratchy oversized t-shirt from the souvenir rack to pull over my dress. I could not walk around looking like a drowned socialite. I asked the attendant about the train. The regional rail station was a mile walk. The last train to Philadelphia left in 20 minutes. I walked. I did not feel the cold anymore. I was in a state of shock. My body moving on autopilot. I bought a ticket with cash. I sat in the back of the empty train car, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I looked like a ghost. I arrived at 30th Street Station in Philadelphia just after 1 in the morning. The station was a cavernous, cathedral-like space. Massive limestone columns soared up to a ceiling that seemed miles away. It was grand and imposing, and utterly indifferent to human suffering. The air inside smelled of damp wool, industrial cleaner, and old pretzels. It was warmer than outside, but not by much. I found a wooden bench in the main waiting area. It was hard and uncomfortable, designed to prevent people from sleeping. I sat down, clutching my phone. 7% battery left. I watched the people. Even at this hour, there were travelers. A businessman rushing to catch the night owl to D.C., his briefcase swinging. A couple embracing near the gate, saying goodbye. A group of college students laughing, dragging heavy suitcases. They all had tickets. They all had destinations. They had homes to go to, or hotels waiting for them. They had a purpose. I was static. I was inventory that had been written off. I closed my eyes, trying to formulate a plan, but my brain, usually so sharp, was a fog of exhaustion. I just needed to survive the night. Just one night. No, 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 please. The voice was soft, panic-stricken. I opened my eyes. A few benches away, a girl was frantically digging through a large tote bag. She looked young, maybe 19 or 20. She was wearing a denim jacket that was too thin for the weather and combat boots that had seen better days. Her hair was dyed a bright, unnatural pink, but it was fading. She upended her bag on the bench. Books, pens, a hairbrush. Loose change fell out. "It has to be here," she whimpered. She began to pat her pockets, her breathing coming in short, hyperventilating gasps. She looked around, her eyes wide and terrified. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. I knew that look. I was wearing that look on the inside. She slumped onto the bench, putting her head in her hands. Her shoulders shook. She was crying, trying to be quiet, trying not to draw attention to herself. I looked at the station clock. It was 1:30 in the morning. A young girl, alone, without money or ID in a city train station, was a target. I looked at the $22 I had left in my hand. Logic dictated I keep it. I needed food. I needed to save every penny for a payphone or a bus fare. Logic dictated I ignore her. It was not my problem. I had enough problems. But 12 years of being cold had not frozen my heart completely. And looking at her, I saw something. I saw the vulnerability I had felt when I walked out of that mansion. I saw someone who had been caught in a storm she did not forecast. I stood up. My legs were stiff. I walked over to the all-night coffee kiosk that was just closing up. "2 hot chocolates," I said to the barista. "Large, with whipped cream." "That will be $12, the barista said. I handed over the money. I had $10 left. I took the 2 steaming paper cups. The heat seeped into my frozen fingers, painful and wonderful. I walked over to the girl. She did not hear me approach. "Hey," I said softly. She jumped, her head snapping up. Her mascara was running down her cheeks. She looked at me with defensive fear, pulling her bag closer. "I don't have any money," she said quickly. "I lost my wallet. I can't give you anything." "I am not asking for anything," I said. I held out one of the cups. "It is cocoa," I said. "It is hot. You look like you need it." She stared at the cup, then at me. She looked at my ruined silk dress peeking out from under the cheap tourist t-shirt. She looked at my bare, muddy feet. "You look like you need it more than I do," she said, her voice raspy. "I have two," I said, sitting down on the opposite end of her bench. "Drink. Sugar helps with the shock." She hesitated for another second, then reached out and took the cup. Her hands were shaking as much as mine. She took a sip, and her shoulders dropped about 2 inches. "Thank you," she whispered. "I am Mila," I said. I didn't know why I introduced myself. Maybe I just wanted to say my name to remind myself I still existed. "I'm Juno," she said. We sat in silence for a long time, sipping the hot, sweet liquid while the station echoed around us. 2 shipwrecked sailors on a wooden island. I did not know it then, but that cup of cocoa was the best investment I had ever made. I thought I was just buying a moment of warmth. I did not know I was buying the weapon that would bring the Caldwell Empire to its knees. "You lose your wallet?" I asked after a while. "Yeah," Juno sniffed, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "Someone bumped me by the entrance. I think they lifted it. My ID, my cash, my train pass, everything." "Where were you going?" "New York," she said. I was running away. Actually, from a party. It was suffocating." "I know the feeling," I said dryly. "I just ran away from a party, too." Juno looked at me, really looked at me, with sharp, intelligent eyes that belied her chaotic appearance. "You look like you ran away from a war," she said. "I suppose I did," I replied. I took the last sip of my cocoa. "And I think I lost." "No," Juno said firmly. She turned on the bench to face me. "You're still standing, or sitting, but you're here. That means you didn't lose. You're just regrouping." I smiled. It was a weak, cracked thing, but it was real. Regrouping. I tested the word. I like that. I looked at this girl, this stranger with pink hair and no wallet, and I felt a strange sense of kinship. We were both at the bottom of the barrel. "Well, Juno," I said, "since we are both stuck here until morning, tell me about this party you escaped. Was it worse than a New Year's Eve where they publicly fire you and replace you with an influencer?" Juno's eyes went wide. A slow grin spread across her tear-stained face. "Okay," she said, "you win. But let me tell you, my dad's parties are legendary for being the circles of hell." We sat there, huddled against the cold, sharing the warmth of a $10 act of kindness, unaware that the gears of fate had just locked into place. "You ran away from a party," I said, repeating Juno's words as the steam from the cocoa warmed my face. "Was it the music or the company?" Juno blew on her drink, her pink hair falling over her eyes. She looked like a rebellious teenager, but there was a sharpness in her gaze that did not match the chaotic aesthetic of her torn fishnets and combat boots. "It was the expectation," Juno said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My father threw it. He throws one every New Year's Eve. It is not really a party. It is a summit. A room full of sharks in tuxedos pretending they are not smelling blood in the water. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was being groomed for a slaughter I didn't sign up for. So I grabbed my bag and ran for the train." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the empty station. "I know exactly what you mean," I said. "I spent the last 12 years in a room like that. I thought I was one of the sharks. Turns out, I was just the bait." Juno looked at me sideways, her eyes narrowing slightly. She was studying me, dissecting the image of the woman in the ruined emerald gown and the oversized tourist t-shirt. "You said your name is Mila," she said slowly. "Mila Coleman?" I froze. My hand tightened around the paper cup. I had not mentioned my last name. In the industry, I was known as Mila Caldwell, but legally, I had kept my maiden name for professional licenses, and many old-timers still knew me as Coleman. "How do you know that name?" I asked, my defenses instantly rising. I looked around the station, wondering if this was a setup. Had Everett sent someone to ensure I really left town? Juno did not look away. "My dad talks about you. He talks about business a lot at dinner. He complains about how hard it is to break the Caldwell supply chain because that woman has the ports locked down tighter than Fort Knox. He says, Everett Caldwell is a fool, but Mila Coleman is the steel spine keeping that old man upright." I stared at her. "Your father sounds like he pays attention." "He respects competence," Juno said. "He hates incompetence. That is why I ran away. I am 19, and he is already trying to put me on the board of directors. I just wanted to go to art school in New York." She took a sip of her cocoa, then looked at me with a sudden, intense seriousness. "So," Juno said, "you are the steel spine. Why are you sitting on a bench in Philadelphia at 2 a.m. with mud on your feet?" I looked at the girl. I had nothing left to hide. The truth was already out there, probably trending on social media thanks to Piper's live stream. "Because the spine has been removed," I said flatly. "Tonight, Everett Caldwell decided I was too old. He replaced me with his new daughter-in-law, a 25-year-old influencer who thinks logistics is about vibes. They fired me in front of 100 people. They froze my accounts. They took my car. They threatened to evict my mother from her nursing home if I asked for help. They stripped me of everything I built for them." I took a breath, expecting the shame to crush me, but instead, I felt a strange lightness. It was the lightness of total devastation. "I am not just broke, Juno," I said. "I am erased. I have 30 minutes before the security guards here kick us out for loitering, and I do not have a plan for minute 31. Juno went silent. She sat there, processing the information. I expected her to offer sympathy. I expected her to say, "I am sorry," or "That is terrible." She did not. Instead, a slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It was not the smile of a 19-year-old art student. It was the smile of a predator who just realized the cage door was open. "They fired you?" Juno asked, her voice steady. "They actually fired Mila Coleman?" "Expired," I corrected her. That was the word they used. Expired. Juno set her cocoa down on the bench. She reached into the deep inner pocket of her denim jacket. She pulled out a phone. It was not a cracked burner like mine. It was the latest model, sleek and expensive, encased in black leather. "I lost my wallet," Juno said, tapping the screen. "But I never lose my comms." "Who are you calling?" I asked. "My ride," Juno said. "And yours?" She dialed a number and put the phone to her ear. Her posture changed instantly. The slouch vanished. Her spine straightened. The fear I had seen in her eyes when she was looking for her wallet was gone, replaced by a cool, commanding authority that sent a shiver down my back. "Dad," she said into the phone. I could hear a muffled, angry voice on the other end. "Stop yelling!" Juno cut him off. Her tone was not disrespectful, but it was firm. It was the tone of an equal. "I am safe. I am at 30th Street Station. Yes, I know. I am sorry about the party, but listen to me. I found something." She looked at me. Her eyes were dark and calculating. "I found a diamond in the trash." "Dad," she said, "you know how you always say you can't beat Caldwell because they run a zero-error operation? Well, guess what? Caldwell just fired the error correction system." Silence on the other end. "Yes," Juno said. "I am sitting next to her, Mila Coleman. She is free agent, and she is pissed off." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew who she was talking to. There was only one rival who had been trying to crack my systems for a decade. There was only one man who Everett Caldwell feared and hated in equal measure. "Donovan," I whispered. Juno nodded at me. She listened for another second, then held the phone out to me. "He wants to speak to you," she said. My hand shook as I took the device. It felt heavy. "Hello?" I said. "Is this Mila Coleman?" The voice was deep, gravelly, and familiar from a dozen industry conferences where we had stood on opposite sides of the room. It was Donovan Hale, the CEO of Hale Ridge Logistics, the wolf of the warehouse district. "It is," I said. "Is it true?" Donovan asked. No pleasantries, no small talk. "Did Everett cut you loose?" "He did," I said. "Tonight, effective immediately." "And the non-compete?" Donovan asked. "Did you sign the exit papers?" "I signed nothing," I said, a spark of realization igniting in my brain. "I walked out. My contract. Actually, my contract expired 6 months ago. We were in negotiations for renewal. Technically, I was working, at will." Donovan laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Stay there," he said. "Do not move. Do not talk to anyone. If a security guard comes near you, put me on speaker." "Donovan," I said, my voice finding its old strength. "I have nothing. No files. No data. No laptop. I don't need files. Mila," Donovan said. "I need the architect. If you are really sitting on a bench at 30th Street, I am coming to get you." "Why?" I asked. "Because," Donovan said, his voice dropping low, "if Everett Caldwell is stupid enough to throw away his map, I am smart enough to pick it up." The line went dead. I handed the phone back to Juno. She was grinning. "Donovan Hale is your father," I said. It was not a question. "Yep." Juno popped the P. "Donovan Hale, the big bad wolf. Everyone thinks he is a ruthless monster. And he is, but he listens to me." "You are not running away to art school, are you?" I asked. Juno shrugged. "I mean, I like painting, but I like winning more. I just didn't want to work for my dad if it meant being a trophy daughter like the ones at the party. I wanted to do something real. Finding you? That is real." We waited. 10 minutes. That was all it took. I saw the headlights first. They swept across the glass doors of the station entrance, cutting through the rain. A car pulled up to the curb. It was not a stretch limousine. It was not a flashy sports car like the ones Owen drove. It was a black armored sedan. High-end, German engineering. Understated, but built like a tank. The driver's door opened. Donovan Hale stepped out. I had seen him in magazines and at gala dinners, but up close, in the harsh fluorescent light of the station entrance, he looked different. He was 50 years old, with silver hair cut close to his skull and a beard that was neatly trimmed. He was wearing a tuxedo, clearly having come from his own party, but he wore it loosely, his tie undone, his top button open. He did not look like a billionaire. He looked like a general who had just walked off the front lines. He did not have an entourage. He did not have security guards. He walked into the station alone, his stride long and purposeful. He spotted us on the bench. He did not smile. He walked straight up to us. Juno stood up. "Hi, Dad." Donovan looked at his daughter. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder, a brief, firm gesture of affection. "We will discuss your little disappearing act later, Juno. But good work." Then he turned to me. I stood up. I was conscious of my bare feet, my muddy toes, the souvenir t-shirt over my ruined gown. I must have looked pathetic. Donovan Hale did not look at my feet. He looked me straight in the eye. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue, intelligent and unyielding. "Mila," he said. "Donovan," I replied. He looked me over, not with pity, but with an appraisal that felt like a physical scan. He was checking for damage. He was checking for weakness. "They took your coat?" he asked, noting the t-shirt. "They took everything," I said. "Good," Donovan said. I blinked. "Good? If they took everything, it means they are afraid of you," Donovan said. It means they know exactly how dangerous you are, and they tried to disarm you. Amateur move. You do not disarm a soldier by taking their gun. You just make them use their hands. He took off his own tuxedo jacket. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of expensive cedar and tobacco. He draped it over my shoulders. Everett Caldwell thinks he won tonight, Donovan said quietly. He thinks he trimmed the fat. He called me expired, I said, pulling the jacket tighter around myself. Donovan shook his head. A dark, predatory amusement danced in his eyes. He is a fool, Donovan said. He thinks you are just the help. He does not understand that you were the only thing keeping air in his lungs. Donovan gestured toward the door, toward the waiting car, toward a future I had not dared to imagine 10 minutes ago. Come with me, Mila, Donovan said. They didn't end you. They didn't erase you. They just burned through their own oxygen. And I'm here to watch them suffocate. I looked at him. Then I looked at Juno, who gave me a thumbs up. I thought about Owen, drinking his scotch. I thought about Piper, filming her vibes. I thought about the cold rain and the empty bank account. And then I stepped forward. Let's go, I said. I walked out of the station, flanked by the enemy, ready to start the war. The ride to Donovan Hale's penthouse was silent, but it was not the oppressive silence of the Caldwell mansion. It was the silence of a vacuum chamber, clean and pressurized. The car, a heavily armored sedan that smelled of leather and ozone, glided through the rainy streets of Philadelphia, putting distance between me and the wreckage of my past life. We arrived at a building near the Delaware River waterfront, a steel and glass needle piercing the storm clouds. It was modern, aggressive, and efficient. Everything the Caldwell estate was not. Donovan led me into a private elevator. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not offer empty platitudes. He simply keyed in a code and watched the numbers climb. The penthouse was stark. It was a space designed for thinking, not for entertaining. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the port I had managed for a decade. From this height, the cranes looked like skeletal fingers scratching at the sky. The guest suite is down the hall on the left, Donovan said, pointing. There are clothes in the closet. My ex-wife kept a wardrobe here for when she visited the city. They should fit. Juno is ordering food. I nodded. I felt robotic, my movements stiff and unnatural. I walked into the bathroom. It was a sanctuary of slate and chrome. I stripped off the ruined emerald gown. It was heavy with mud and rain. A sodden husk of the woman I had tried to be for 12 years. I dropped it on the floor. I did not look at it. I stepped into the shower. The water was hot, scaldingly hot. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw. I washed away the mud from the Caldwell driveway. I washed away the hairspray from the gala. I washed away the invisible fingerprints of Everett's condescension and Owen's cowardice. When I stepped out, I wrapped myself in a thick, white robe. I looked in the mirror, without the makeup, without the jewels, without the designer dress. I looked younger. I looked like the Mila Coleman who had started in a dispatch office 20 years ago. The lines around my mouth were not from age. They were from biting my tongue. I found a pair of black slate trousers and a white cashmere sweater in the closet. They were simple, elegant, and warm. I dressed quickly. I was done with costumes. This was armor. I walked out into the main living area. Donovan was standing by a massive table made of reclaimed wood, covered in blueprints and tablets. Juno was sitting on a sofa nearby, eating takeout noodles from a carton, watching us with bright, curious eyes. Donovan poured a glass of water and slid it across the table to me. No alcohol. He knew I needed a clear head. Sit, he said. I sat. I do not offer charity. Mila, Donovan began, his voice low and gravelly. I offered you a ride because I respect you. I brought you here because I want to make a deal. I am listening, I said. I am not going to offer you a job, Donovan said. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I have plenty of employees. I have armies of people who can follow orders. I do not need a chief operating officer. I need a general. He tapped a finger on the table. I am launching a new division, he said. Hale Ridge Prestige, high-value cargo, pharmaceuticals, aerospace components, art, hazardous materials, the kind of freight where if you are 1 minute late or 1 degree off in temperature, the lawsuit is worth more than the truck. I have the capital, I have the fleet, but I do not have the brain. I do not have the person who can look at a global map and see the bottlenecks before they happen. You want me to run it, I said. I want you to co-found it, Donovan corrected me. I froze. Co-found? I am offering you 30% equity, Donovan said calmly. Vesting immediately. You will have full operational control. You hire who you want. You fire who you want. You build the system from the ground up. No interference. No family vetoes. Just profit and execution. 30%. At Caldwell. I had begged for 5% and been laughed at. Donovan was offering me a third of a venture that would likely be worth hundreds of millions within 2 years. Why? I asked. You could hire me for a salary. You know I am desperate. Desperate people work for a paycheck, Donovan said. Partners work for blood. I want you to have skin in the game, Mila. Because when we go to war with Caldwell, I need you to know that every victory is yours to keep. The offer was intoxicating. It was everything I had ever wanted. Respect, ownership, power. But the lawyer in my head, the one who had memorized every clause of every contract I had ever signed, slammed on the brakes. I can't, I said, the word tasting like ash. The non-compete clause, my contract with Caldwell has a restrictive covenant. It bars me from working for a competitor in the logistics sector for 2 years within a 500-mile radius. If I sign with you, Everett will sue us into oblivion. He will get an injunction before I even print a business card. Donovan did not flinch. He did not look worried. A small, cold smile touched his lips. I thought you might say that, he said. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick leather folder. He slid it toward me. 2 things, Donovan said. First, legally. A non-compete requires consideration. It requires a valid contract. As you told me on the phone, your contract expired 6 months ago. You have been working as an at-will employee. Without a renewed signature, that covenant is as flimsy as wet paper, but more importantly, he tapped the folder. Open it. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of legal filings, patent registrations, internal process copyright forms. My eyes scanned the first document. It was a registration for a proprietary algorithmic routing system for cold chain storage. I recognized the diagram instantly. I had drawn it on a napkin 3 years ago. I had spent 6 months coding the logic with our IT team. It was my baby. It was the reason Caldwell's spoilage rate was the lowest in the industry. I looked at the name on the filing. Registrant, Piper Caldwell. Date, December 10th. I felt the blood drain from my face. I turned the page. Standard operating procedure. Crisis management protocols for port strikes. Author, Piper Caldwell. Date, November 15th. I flipped through the pages faster. My hands were shaking. Every major system I had built, every unique process I had designed, every piece of intellectual property that made me valuable, it had all been systematically registered, copyrighted, and filed under Piper's name over the last 2 months. They didn't just fire you tonight, Donovan said softly. This has been in the works for a quarter. They were harvesting you. I stared at the papers. The betrayal was so absolute, so calculated, it took my breath away. They stole my mind, I whispered. They stole my work. They stole your history, Donovan said. They knew they couldn't just replace you. You were too integrated. So they had Piper, or more likely, the expensive lawyers they hired for her, rename all your work. They turned Mila Coleman's genius into Piper Caldwell's legacy before she even stepped into the building. If you try to claim ownership now, they will say, you are the thief. I looked up at Donovan, the sadness I had felt earlier, the lingering affection for Owen, the concern for the drivers and the warehouse staff I had left behind. It all evaporated. In its place, something hot and hard forged itself in my chest, I had been worried about collateral damage. I had been worried that if I fought back, innocent people, the forklift drivers, the dispatchers, the people I had mentored, would get hurt. But I realized now that they were already in danger. If Everett and Piper were willing to do this to me, to steal and lie and erase a human being, what would they do to a truck driver who had a back injury? What would they do to a warehouse worker who needed a sick day? Everett Caldwell was not a businessman. He was a parasite. And Piper was just a younger, hungrier host. "They think I'm gone," I said. The voice that came out of my throat sounded different. It was deeper. It was dangerous. "They think you are crying in a motel room," Donovan agreed. "They think you are going to fade away because you are too old to fight." "I am not too old," I said. "I am just seasoned enough to know exactly where the structural weaknesses are." I looked at the contract Donovan had placed next to the folder. Founding Partner Agreement. Hale Ridge, Prestige Logistics. There was a blank line at the bottom. "The non-compete is void," Donovan said, watching me closely. "But even if it wasn't, there is a loophole. You are not taking a salary. You are taking equity. You are an owner. The courts view owners differently than employees. And with the evidence of IP theft I just showed you, no judge in Pennsylvania will enforce a restrictive covenant from a company that defrauded its own executive." He handed me a pen. It was a heavy black fountain pen. "One condition," I said. "Name it," Donovan replied. "We do not attack them," I said. Donovan raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "If we attack them publicly, if we sue them now, we look like the aggressors," I said, my mind racing, calculating the moves 3 steps ahead. "It becomes a messy divorce. The market hates drama. Clients hate instability. If I sue for the IP now, it will be tied up in court for years." "So what is the plan?" Donovan asked. "We let them drown," I said. "We build Hale Ridge. We quietly let the industry know I am here, and we wait. Piper has my manuals, but she does not have my instincts. She has the sheet music, but she cannot play the piano. She will make a mistake, a big one, and when she does, we will be the only safe harbor left." I looked at Juno. She was nodding vigorously, a piece of noodle hanging from her fork. "Let her post her videos," I said. "Let her talk about vibes. The market is a brutal teacher. It does not care about your follower count. It cares about whether the cargo arrives." I looked down at the paper. For 12 years, I had signed documents as Mila Caldwell. I had worn that name like a badge of honor. I had let it define me. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed black and permanent. I did not sign Mila Caldwell. I wrote, in sharp, angular letters, "Mila Coleman." I capped the pen and pushed the document back to Donovan. "Done," I said. Donovan looked at the signature. He smiled. It was the first time I had seen him smile with genuine warmth. "Welcome to the war, Ms. Coleman," he said. "I need a phone," I said, standing up. "And I need a list of every client whose contract with Caldwell is up for renewal in the next 90 days. I am not going to solicit them. I am just going to send them a holiday card, a card that says New Year, New Standard with our new logo." "Juno is already on it," Donovan said. I walked to the window and looked out at the rain-lashed city. Somewhere out there, in the mainline mansion, the party was winding down. Everett was probably toasting to his brilliance. Piper was probably editing her live stream. Owen was probably passing out. They were celebrating their victory. They did not know that the building they were celebrating in was already on fire. They just couldn't smell the smoke yet. "I am going to take everything," I whispered to the glass. "Not because I want it, but because they are not worthy of keeping it." I turned back to Donovan and Juno. "Let's get to work," I said. "I have a supply chain to build." The migration began 3 days after I signed the partnership agreement with Donovan. It did not start with a press release or a flashy announcement. It started with a quiet series of phone calls made from the spare room of Donovan's penthouse, which I had converted into a command center. My first call was to Brenda Miller. Brenda was 62 years old. She had been the head of customs brokerage at Caldwell Harbor for 15 years. She knew the harmonized tariff schedule better than she knew her own grandchildren's birthdays. She was grumpy. She smoked terrible slim cigarettes, and she had zero patience for small talk. "Hello?" Her voice was raspy on the other end. "Brenda, it is Mila." "Mila," she grunted. "I heard you got the boot. Welcome to the club. They fired me yesterday morning. Said my aura was too gray for the new open concept office." "I am sorry, Brenda," I said, "but I am not calling to offer condolences. I am calling to offer you a job. Head of compliance at Hale Ridge Prestige, 20% salary bump, full benefits, and you are allowed to be as gray as you want." There was a pause. "When do I start?" "Now," I said. "I just sent a courier to pick up your laptop." It went on like that for a week. I did not recruit the young, ambitious account managers who were trying to impress Piper with their TikTok editing skills. I recruited the dinosaurs. I called the warehouse manager who was let go because he refused to wear the new neon pink safety vest Piper designed. I called the fleet dispatcher who was fired for telling Piper that trucks cannot physically drive 80 miles an hour in a snowstorm. I built an army of the rejected. We were not young. We were not cool. We did not have an aesthetic, but we were the people who actually knew how to move freight. While I was building a fortress of competence, Piper Caldwell was busy renovating the Caldwell headquarters. Through my contacts, drivers who were still on the inside, secretaries who were too low-level to be fired, I heard stories that sounded like satire. Piper had decided that the operations center, the nerve center of the company where we tracked global movements, was too aggressive. She replaced the wall of monitors with a mindfulness wall, covered in moss. She replaced the ergonomic chairs with yoga balls. But the real disaster started in the warehouse. One of my former forklift drivers, a man named Tony who was still working there, called me late one night. He sounded close to tears. "Mila, you are not going to believe this," Tony whispered. "She changed the bin location system." "She what?" I asked, putting down my pen. "The bin system is alphanumeric. It corresponds to the aisle, rack, and shelf. It is a universal standard." "Not anymore," Tony said. "She said numbers are impersonal. She replaced the aisle numbers with colors based on a mood board. Aisle 1 is now Sunset Peach. Aisle 2 is Ocean Breeze. Aisle 3 is Sage Wisdom." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Tony, tell me you are joking." "I wish I was," Tony said. "The scanners don't read Sage Wisdom. Mila, the inventory software is crashing because it is looking for A04, and the barcode now scans as a color swatch. We have drivers wandering around looking for Midnight Sky, while 3 tons of steel piping is sitting on the loading dock blocking the exit. It is anarchy." It was funny. It was hilarious, in a dark, twisted way. But in logistics, anarchy is expensive. The first domino fell 7 days later. It happened at the Port of Baltimore. Caldwell had a long-standing contract with a high-end gourmet food importer. This client imported fresh white truffles from Italy and Wagyu beef from Japan. It was a high-risk, high-reward account. The cargo was worth $400,000, and it was extremely perishable. I knew the schedule. I knew the shipment was due to arrive on Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, my newsfeed exploded. Luxury food crisis at Port of Baltimore. I clicked the link. The story was simple. The container full of white truffles and beef had arrived on time. But when the customs broker, a new hire Piper had brought in because he was a friend from college, filed the entry, he used the wrong classification code. Instead of classifying the truffles as fresh fungi, he had classified them under a code used for processed canned goods. The FDA system flagged the discrepancy immediately. The container was pulled for an intensive exam. Normally, this is fixable. You call the port, you amend the entry, you pay a small fine, and you get the cargo out in 4 hours. But Piper did not know that. Piper was at a spa retreat in the Poconos, celebrating her first month of leadership. By the time anyone at Caldwell noticed the hold, the container had been sitting in the inspection area for 36 hours. The inspection area did not have power hookups for the refrigeration unit. The reefer engine ran out of fuel. The internal temperature of the container rose from 2 degrees Celsius to 20 degrees Celsius. $400,000 worth of white truffles and Wagyu beef turned into a rotting biological hazard. The smell was reportedly so bad that the longshoremen refused to work on the adjacent dock. The Port Authority had to cordon off the area. And then, Piper made it worse. Instead of issuing a formal apology, instead of quietly paying the claim and begging the client for forgiveness, Piper went live. I watched the video on my tablet. Juno and Donovan stood behind me, watching over my shoulder. Piper was sitting in her car, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. She was using a filter that added sparkling teardrops to her eyes. "Hey guys," Piper sobbed into the camera. "I just wanted to come on here and be real with you. The Port of Baltimore is literally bullying me right now. They are holding our cargo hostage because of a tiny paperwork thing. It is just so toxic. Like, why can't we just trust each other? Why does the government have to be so controlling?" She wiped a tear. "I feel like there is just so much negative energy directed at me right now, and it is manifesting as blocked shipments. If you guys could send some high-vibe emojis in the chat, I would really appreciate it. We are trying to revolutionize this industry, but the haters are trying to stop our shine." I paused the video. "Negative energy," Donovan repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. "She blamed a customs violation on negative energy. Read the comments," Juno said, pointing at the screen. The internet was eating her alive. User 123. "Girl, you let $500,000 of food rot because you don't know the code for mushrooms. This isn't astrology. It's negligence." Logistics, meme lord. "Imagine telling your client their beef spoiled because Mercury was in retrograde." Port rat. "I work at Baltimore. The smell made a seagull throw up. Caldwell stinks." It was a viral disaster. But for me, it was the signal. The phone on my desk began to ring. It was not a journalist. It was the VP of operations for a major pharmaceutical company, a client I had nurtured for 5 years, a client who had stayed with Caldwell out of loyalty to me, and who was now watching the Caldwell ship sink. "Mila," the voice on the other end said. "I heard you landed at Hale Ridge." "I did. David," I said smoothly. "How are you?" "I am terrified," David said. "I have 3 containers of insulin coming into Newark next week. I cannot afford negative energy. I need them cold, and I need them cleared." "We can handle it," I said. "Hale Ridge Prestige is fully operational. And David, our warehouse aisles are numbered, not color-coded." He laughed, a sound of pure relief. "Send me the contract. I don't care about the price. Just get me out of there." That afternoon, I signed the pharmaceutical contract. Then I signed a medical device manufacturer who needed heart valves shipped from Germany. Then I signed a luxury fashion house that was terrified their spring collection would end up on a mood board instead of in stores. I did not have to sell. I did not have to pitch. I just had to answer the phone and promise sanity. In the span of 48 hours, Caldwell Harbor Logistics lost 12% of its projected annual revenue. They lost the clients that required precision. They were left with the clients who shipped scrap metal and recycled paper. Low margin, high volume, dirty freight. Donovan walked into the office as I was hanging up with the 3rd client of the day. He placed a cup of coffee on my desk. "Everett is telling the board it is a blip," Donovan said. "He is saying the Baltimore incident was an act of God, and that the clients leaving are just trimming the fat. He called Piper's video a bold strategy to engage the youth demographic." "He is in denial," I said, taking the coffee. "He has surrounded himself with mirrors, and he only sees what he wants to see." "Owen is trying to fix it," Donovan added. "Owen?" I raised an eyebrow. "He went down to the dispatch floor this morning," Donovan said. "He tried to manually override the routing system to prioritize the remaining VIP clients, but he didn't know the admin password. He locked the entire fleet out of the fuel card system for 2 hours. Drivers were stranded at gas stations across 3 states until IT reset the server." I shook my head. It was tragic. It was like watching a toddler try to fly a Boeing 747. They are choking, I said. The cash flow is going to dry up within 30 days. The spoilage claim from the truffle shipment alone is going to eat their quarterly profit. And that is when animals get dangerous, Donovan said. When they are cornered. He was right. An hour later, my personal phone buzzed. It was a text message. The number was unknown, but the content told me exactly who it was. It was from Sarah, my former executive assistant at Caldwell, a timid, loyal woman who was probably hiding in the bathroom to send this. Mila, be careful. I just brought coffee into the conference room. Everett and the lawyers are in there. They are not talking about fixing the business. They are talking about you. I stared at the screen. They are drafting a lawsuit. The next message read, they are going to claim you sabotaged the server before you left. They are going to say you planted a virus that caused the inventory issues. They want to frame you for the Baltimore failure. They are coming for you. I put the phone down. My hand was steady. What is it? Juno asked from the couch. The end game, I said. They realize they cannot beat me in the market, so they are going to try to put me in jail. I looked at Donovan. His eyes were cold. Blue ice. Let them come, Donovan said. They are bringing a knife to a gunfight. No, I said, standing up and walking to the window to look at the gray skyline. They are bringing a lie to a truth fight, and they have no idea that I kept the receipts. I turned back to them. Get the legal team ready, I said. If Everett wants to sue me for sabotage, I am going to show the world exactly who destroyed his company, and I am going to do it under oath. The viral disaster was just the opening act. The real show was about to begin in the courtroom. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday morning with a thud that shook my desk. It was a thick stack of papers bound in a blue folder, delivered by a process server who looked like he had done this 1,000 times. I picked it up. The cover page was bold and aggressive. Caldwell Harbor Logistics versus Mila Coleman and Hale Ridge Prestige. The allegations were a greatest hits collection of corporate paranoia, breach of contract, theft of trade secrets, tortious interference, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and then, the number that was supposed to make me stop breathing. They were suing me for $50 million in damages. I looked at the number. $50 million. It was absurd. It was a scare tactic designed to bankrupt me in legal fees before I ever stepped foot in a courtroom. They wanted an immediate injunction to stop me from working, to stop Hale Ridge from operating, and to freeze my assets until the end of time. Donovan picked up the file. He flipped through it, his face unreadable. Everett hired Sterling and Associates, Donovan said. They are not lawyers. They are meat grinders. They charge $1,000 an hour to destroy people. Let them grind, I said, sipping my tea. I have something harder than meat. We hired Elena Vance. Elena was the opposite of the Caldwell legal team. She did not have a billboard on the highway. She did not wear flashy suits. She was a small woman in her 50s with graying hair and a voice that rarely rose above a conversational volume. She was a scalpel, and she specialized in corporate employment law with a focus on executive severance. When I showed her the file, she did not gasp at the $50 million figure. She just adjusted her glasses and asked, "Do you have the original employment agreement from 12 years ago?" "Yes," I said. "And the renewal addendums?" "Every single one," I said. She spent 3 hours reading. She did not speak. She just made small notes in the margins with a mechanical pencil. Finally, she looked up. A tiny, terrifying smile touched her lips. "This is going to be fun," Elena said. The hearing for the preliminary injunction was held 2 weeks later in the Federal District Court in Philadelphia. The courtroom was cold, smelling of floor wax and old wood. Everett Caldwell sat at the plaintiff's table. He looked healthy, flushed with the anticipation of crushing me. He wore a navy suit that cost more than my father made in a year. Next to him was his lead counsel, Marcus Sterling, a man with a tan that was too dark and teeth that were too white. Owen was there, sitting behind his father, looking pale and nauseous. Piper was there too, wearing a black dress that was modest by her standards, but she kept checking her reflection in the screen of her phone. clearly bored by the lack of cameras. I sat with Donovan and Elena. I wore a simple gray suit. I did not look at Everett. I looked at the judge. Judge Anthony Rossi was a no-nonsense man who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. He adjusted his robes and looked at Sterling. "Counsel, you are asking for an emergency injunction to stop Ms. Coleman from earning a living," the judge said. "That is a high bar. You need to prove immediate and irreparable harm." Sterling stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a flourish. He had a voice made for theater. "Your Honor," Sterling boomed, "this is a clear case of a disgruntled former employee seeking to destroy the family that built her. Ms. Coleman was terminated for cause, specifically, a failure to adapt to modern technologies. In her rage, she stole proprietary data. She poached key staff. She is currently using confidential client lists to undercut Caldwell Harbor. She is a saboteur." He pointed a finger at me. "She is a woman who could not accept that the company needed to evolve." Sterling continued. "She is bitter, she is vindictive, and she is using stolen property to wage a personal vendetta against my client." It was a good story. It painted me as the emotional, unstable ex-wife of the company. Elena sat perfectly still. She did not object. She let him talk. She let him pile on the adjectives. She let him dig the hole deep. When Sterling finally sat down, looking satisfied, the judge turned to us. "Ms. Vance?" the judge said. Elena stood up. She did not button her jacket. She did not boom. She walked to the podium with a single piece of paper in her hand. "Your Honor," Elena said softly, "Mr. Sterling relies entirely on the premise that Ms. Coleman was under a contractual obligation to Caldwell Harbor Logistics at the time of her departure. He cites the non-compete clause in her employment contract. Is that correct?" "It is attached as Exhibit A." Sterling snapped from his seat. "Yes," Elena said. "Exhibit A is a contract dated January 1st, 2020. It had a term of 3 years. It expired on January 1st, 2023. She paused. The room went quiet. "There was a 1-year extension signed in 2023, Elena continued. "That extension expired on January 1st, 2024. We are currently in 2025. She placed the paper on the judge's bench. "My client has been working without a contract for 6 months, Elena said. "The renewal negotiations were stalled because Mr. Owen Caldwell, the Vice President of Human Resources, never got around to sending over the final paperwork. Therefore, under Pennsylvania law, Ms. Coleman was an at-will employee. The non-compete clause expired with the contract. She is free to work for whoever she wants. She is free to start her own company. She is free to take clients who voluntarily choose to follow her." I watched Everett's face. The smugness vanished. He turned to Owen. "Is that true?" Everett hissed. Owen shrank into his chair. I thought the auto-renewal clause was—" "There is no auto-renewal clause in an executive officer agreement. Owen," I thought, "I removed it 10 years ago to protect the company from lazy executives." "Irony is a beautiful thing." Sterling stood up, his face red. "Your Honor, this is a technicality. The implied intent. The law does not deal in implied intent when written contracts exist. Mr. Sterling," Judge Rossi said, looking over his glasses. "If your client forgot to renew his COO's contract, that is his problem, not the court's. The non-compete is unenforceable." Sterling scrambled. He knew he was losing the foundation of his case. "But the sabotage!" Sterling shouted. "The theft of trade secrets! She stole our routing algorithms. She caused the spoilage of the Baltimore shipment." Elena did not flinch. She picked up a second document. "Regarding the trade secrets," Elena said, "we have evidence that the intellectual property in question, the routing algorithms and safety protocols, were actually registered under the name of Piper Caldwell 2 months prior to Ms. Coleman's termination. If anyone stole credit for work, it was the plaintiff." Elena turned and looked directly at Piper. Piper froze, her hand halfway to her phone. "And regarding the Baltimore shipment," Elena said, "Mr. Sterling claims my client sabotaged the customs entry, causing the cargo to spoil. He claims this was done to damage Caldwell's reputation. Elena handed a thick file to the bailiff to give to the judge. This is the digital audit trail from the Customs and Border Protection System, Elena said. It shows exactly who logged in and altered the classification code for that shipment. It was not Ms. Coleman. The user login was P. Caldwell Exec, and the digital signature on the sworn declaration, a federal document, mind you, is right here. The judge looked at the document. He looked at Piper. Is this your signature, Mrs. Caldwell? The judge asked. Piper stood up, looking panicked. I sign a lot of things. I don't read every little code. You signed a federal customs declaration under penalty of perjury, the judge said, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. And you got it wrong, and now your lawyer is accusing this woman of doing it? She must have hacked me, Piper stammered. She is jealous because I am young and she is old. Elena pounced. It was the moment she had been waiting for. Jealousy, Elena repeated. Let us talk about the motivation for Ms. Coleman's firing. Mr. Sterling claims it was performance-based, but we have the text messages sent between Mr. Owen Caldwell and Mr. Everett Caldwell on the night of the termination. Elena projected the images onto the courtroom screen. There they were, the texts I had subpoenaed from the company server, which I knew they never wiped properly because Owen didn't know how. From Everett. She is too old. She ruins the aesthetic. Get rid of the old furniture. From Owen. I agree. Piper says she brings down the vibe. We need fresh faces. Expired goods. The words expired goods loomed large on the screen. This is not a performance review, Elena said, her voice sharp as a blade. This is age discrimination, plain and simple. They fired a 41-year-old woman with a stellar performance record because she did not fit the aesthetic of the new 25-year-old manager, and they are using this lawsuit to cover up their own discriminatory practices. Elena turned to Owen. Mr. Owen Caldwell, she said, you are the head of human resources, correct? Owen looked like he was about to vomit. Yes. Did you authorize an investigation into age discrimination before firing Ms. Coleman? No, Owen whispered. Did you ensure her contract was valid before you let your father sue her for $50 million? I missed it, Owen stammered. So, Elena said, turning back to the judge. We have a company that forgot to sign a contract, fired an executive based on her age, committed customs fraud by falsifying federal documents under the new manager's login, and is now wasting the court's time with a frivolous lawsuit to cover their incompetence. The courtroom was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Everett Caldwell was staring at the table. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the wreckage of his arrogance. He realized, in that moment, that he had not just lost the lawsuit, he had exposed himself. Judge Rossi closed the file. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, I am denying your request for an injunction, obviously. Sterling opened his mouth, but the judge held up a hand. Furthermore, Judge Rossi continued, I am dismissing the plaintiff's claims for damages with prejudice. You cannot sue someone for breaching a contract that does not exist. He looked at Piper. Regarding the customs declaration, I am obligated to refer this evidence of potential falsification of federal documents to the Port Authority and Customs and Border Protection for investigation. He looked at Owen and Everett. And regarding the text messages, the judge said, his voice dripping with disdain, I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. If I were you, Mr. Caldwell, I would be very worried about a federal discrimination audit. Everett stood up. Your Honor, this is outrageous. I am Everett Caldwell. Sit down, sir, the judge barked, or I will hold you in contempt. You came into my courtroom asking for equity, but you came with unclean hands. You are lucky I don't sanction you for filing this garbage. Judge Rossi banged his gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. Case dismissed. I stood up. I felt Donovan's hand on my back. Nice work, Donovan whispered. I looked across the aisle. Everett was purple with rage, screaming at Sterling. Piper was crying, asking if she was going to jail for the signature thing. And Owen? Owen was sitting alone. He looked up and met my eyes. He looked for the wife who used to fix his messes. He looked for the woman who would tell him it was going to be okay. I looked at him. I did not smile. I did not frown. I just looked at him like he was a stranger. Then I turned and walked out of the courtroom. I had walked in with a $50 million lawsuit hanging over my head. I walked out with my freedom, and I left them holding a grenade with the pin pulled out. Elena, I said as we reached the hallway, send the bill to Hale Ridge and add a bonus. My pleasure, Elena said, tucking her file away. I hate bullies. We walked out into the sunlight. The rain had stopped. The city looked bright and sharp. What now? Donovan asked. Now? I checked my watch. Now I have a meeting with the bank. I hear Caldwell Harbor's credit line is up for review, and the bank gets nervous when the CEO is under federal investigation. Donovan laughed. You are ruthless. I am just efficient, I said. They wanted to replace me? Fine. Let them see if they can replace their credit rating. The victory in the courtroom was sweet, but the devastation that followed in the financial markets was absolute. It did not happen with a bang, but with the terrifying swiftness of a margin call. In the world of logistics, trust is the only currency that matters. When Judge Rossi announced that he was referring Caldwell Harbor to federal authorities for customs fraud and discrimination, the banks did not wait for the investigation to conclude. They saw a sinking ship, and they scrambled to get their cargo off before it went under. 48 hours after the hearing, the lead lender for Caldwell Harbor, a massive institutional bank in New York, invoked the material adverse change clause in their lending agreement. They froze the revolving credit facility. This was the lifeline that paid for fuel, driver salaries, and port fees while waiting for clients to pay their invoices. Without that credit line, Caldwell Harbor was clinically dead. They just hadn't stopped twitching yet. I sat in the Hale Ridge office, watching the industry news feeds. Caldwell Harbor facing liquidity crunch. One headline read, Vendors demand cash up front from logistics giant. Read another. They are done, I said to Donovan, who was reviewing a stack of documents at the conference table. They cannot make payroll on Friday. The fuel cards will be cut off by Monday. It is a total collapse. Donovan looked up. He had that same predator smile he had worn the night he picked me up at the train station. Collapse is messy, Donovan said. Bankruptcy courts take years. Assets get sold off for pennies to strangers. I do not like strangers owning my territory. He slid a heavy binder across the table toward me. The cover was plain black. What is this? I asked. Open it, he said. I flipped it open. It was a purchase agreement. A company called North Star Holdings had purchased the distressed debt of Caldwell Harbor Logistics from the panicked bank. North Star Holdings? I asked, confused. Who are they? They are a shell company, Donovan said, taking a sip of his espresso. Wholly owned by Hale Ridge, I bought their debt. Mila, the bank was terrified of the federal investigation, so they sold the note to me for 60 cents on the dollar. They took a 40% haircut just to get Caldwell off their books. I stared at him, the realization washing over me like a cold wave. You bought the debt, I whispered. You own the note. We own the note, Donovan corrected me. You are a partner. You own 30% of this paper. I looked down at the document. It was a masterstroke. By buying the debt, we had bypassed the need to compete with them. We had bypassed the need to sue them. We were now their senior secured creditor. This means, I started, my mind racing through the legal implications. It means they technically work for us, Donovan said. We can call the loan immediately. We can foreclose on the assets, or we can simply squeeze them until they suffocate. You are not just their rival anymore. Mila, you are their landlord. You are their bank. If they want to buy a stapler, they need your permission. I leaned back in my chair. A feeling of profound, terrifying power settled in my chest. For 12 years, I had begged Everett for approval. I had begged for a budget. I had begged for a raise. Now, I held the mortgage on his entire existence. "I want to see the books," I said. As the senior creditor, we have the right to audit the financials to ensure asset protection. "I already sent the demand letter," Donovan said. "The files are on the secure server. Access granted 10 minutes ago." I spent the next 6 hours in a state of controlled rage. For 12 years, I had been told that money was tight. When I asked for raises for my dispatchers, Everett told me margins were thin. When I asked for upgrades to the fleet, Owen told me we had to be conservative. When I asked for my equity, they told me the company's valuation was fragile. I opened the ledger. It was a graveyard of lies. "Look at this," I said to Juno, who was sitting next to me, learning how to read a balance sheet. I pointed to a line item. "Consulting fees. OC, Strategic Solutions." "Who is O.C.?" Juno asked. "Owen Caldwell," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "He has been paying himself a consulting fee of $15,000 a month, on top of his salary, on top of his bonuses." "Oh, for what?" Juno asked. "For nothing," I said. "For existing." I scrolled down. Renovations. Executive estate. $200,000. Classified as office improvement. Travel and entertainment. P. Caldwell. $50,000 in December alone. Classified as client development. I looked at the receipts attached. Spa treatments. Designer handbags. First-class tickets to Miami for a branding workshop. They had been looting the company, while I was screaming at port authorities to save perishable cargo, while I was missing my mother's birthday to save a contract. They were treating the operating capital like a personal piggy bank. "They weren't just exploiting me," I said, slamming the laptop shut. "They were robbing the people who actually work. Every dollar Piper spent on a handbag was a dollar that didn't go to a driver's safety bonus." "What do you want to do?" Donovan asked. "We can foreclose right now. Shut the doors. Sell the trucks." "No," I said. "Not yet. I want them to feel it. I want them to wake up tomorrow and realize that the ceiling is lowering, inch by inch." The pressure broke Everett first. News reached us the next morning. Everett Caldwell had collapsed at the country club. Chest pains. He was rushed to the hospital. It was not a heart attack, the doctors said. It was severe angina brought on by extreme stress. He was alive, but he was out of the game. He was lying in a VIP room, pumped full of beta blockers, unable to shout at anyone. That left Owen. My phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. I looked at the screen. Owen. I let it ring 3 times. Let him sweat. Let him wonder if I would even pick up. Then I answered. "This is Mila Coleman." "Mila?" Owen's voice was ragged. He sounded like he hadn't slept in a week. "Thank God. I didn't think you would answer. I am a busy woman." "Owen," I said, typing on my keyboard while I spoke. "Make it quick." "Dad is in the hospital," Owen said. "Did you hear?" "I heard," I said. "I assume the hospital accepts your insurance? Or did you forget to pay that premium too?" "Mila, please," Owen cracked. "Don't be like that. We are drowning here. The bank cut us off. Vendors are pulling their trucks. I have drivers abandoning loads on the highway because their fuel cards are declined. I don't know what to do. You are the vice president of operations now." "Owen," I said calmly. "Or is it Piper? I forget who is playing CEO this week." "Piper is. She is overwhelmed," Owen admitted. "She is locking herself in her office crying. She can't handle the pressure." "Imagine that," I said. "Vibes do not pay for diesel. Mila, listen." Owen lowered his voice, sounding desperate and conspiratorial. "We need you back. Not officially. Maybe Dad is too proud. But you could come back as a consultant? A special advisor? You could work from the background. You could fix the routing. Talk to the bank. Get the cash flowing again. We can pay you. We can pay you whatever you want." I stopped typing. The audacity was breathtaking. "Let me understand this," I said slowly. You want me to come back and save the company that fired me, sued me, and humiliated me. You want me to do the work, fix your mess, and let Piper and your father keep their titles? You want me to be the secret maid cleaning up after the party? We can make it worth your while, Owen pleaded. We are family. Mila. We were married for 12 years. Doesn't that mean anything? I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. It means I know exactly how worthless your promises are, I said. And Owen, I am not a consultant, and I am certainly not family, not anymore. Then help us for old time's sake, he begged. If we don't get funding by Friday, we are dead. You are already dead. Owen, I said, you just haven't read the obituary yet. And by the way, I am not coming back as an advisor. I am coming back as the owner of your debt. What? Owen breathed. Check your email, I said. Hale Ridge just bought your loan package. I am your creditor now, and I am declining your request for an emergency cash injection. Have a nice day. I hung up. 10 minutes later, Piper tried her last card. She posted a video. Of course she did. She was sitting in the darkened boardroom, looking disheveled but in a curated way. I am being targeted, Piper whispered into the camera. There is a shadowy group of corporate elites who are trying to destroy a female-led business. They are buying our debt. They are bullying us. It is misogyny. It is ageism against the youth. They are threatened by my vision. She looked at the camera with pleading eyes. Please, if you support women in business, buy a Caldwell gift card. Support us. Don't let the bullies win. It was pathetic, and the market reacted with brutal indifference. The comments were not supportive. User 88. You aren't being bullied because you're a woman. You're being sued because you committed fraud. Trucker Joe. Pay your drivers. My buddy has been stuck in Ohio for 3 days with no fuel money while you beg for gift card sales. Market Watch. Caldwell Harbor credit rating downgraded to junk status. Default imminent. No one cared about her narrative. They cared about competence, and she had none. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my white cashmere sweater. It is time, I said to Donovan. Time for what? He asked. Time to go home, I said. Or rather, to the house I just bought. I called Elena, my lawyer. Draft the foreclosure notice, I said, but do not file it yet. I want to deliver the terms of surrender in person. When? Elena asked. Tomorrow morning, I said. 9 o'clock. Tell Owen and the board to be there, and tell them the new senior creditor requires their physical presence. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue. Donovan drove me to the Caldwell headquarters, the massive glass building that I had walked into every day for 12 years, the building where I had entered through the side door, the employee entrance, the service elevator, not today, the security guard at the gate. A man named Sam, who I had known for years, stepped out of his booth. He looked tired. He saw the armored car. He saw Donovan. Then he saw me in the passenger seat. His eyes went wide. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't check the list. He just hit the button and opened the gate. He saluted me as we drove past. We parked in the spot marked reserved for chairman. I stepped out of the car. I was wearing a white suit, sharp and immaculate. I held a black leather portfolio. Donovan stood beside me. Ready? I have been ready for 12 years, I said. We walked to the main entrance. The sliding doors opened. The receptionist looked up, gasped, and dropped her phone. I walked past her. I walked past the portraits of the founders. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. I was not stealing the company. I was not destroying it. I was repossessing it. The elevator doors opened. I walked down the hallway toward the boardroom. I could hear shouting from inside. Owen's voice. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy double doors open and stepped inside. The room went silent. Owen was standing at the head of the table, looking like a ghost. Piper was slumped in a chair, scrolling on her phone. 3 board members were sitting there with their heads in their hands. They all looked up. Mila, Owen whispered. You came. I did, I said. I walked to the other end of the table, opposite him. I placed my portfolio on the mahogany surface. But I did not come to negotiate, I said, my voice filling the room. I came to collect. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind me, sealing the room. The air in the boardroom was stale, smelling of fear and cold coffee. I walked to the head of the table, the spot where Everett Caldwell had sat for 40 years. I did not sit down. I stood, placing my hands on the leather portfolio I had brought. Everett was there. He had discharged himself from the hospital against medical advice. He looked like a shadow of the man who had toasted to my expiration on New Year's Eve. His skin was gray, his lips were pale, and he was slumped in a wheelchair at the corner of the table, but his eyes were still burning with a stubborn, foolish pride. Owen stood near him, looking like a child waiting for a scolding. Piper was seated, her arms crossed, tapping her foot, looking at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion. The 3 remaining board members looked at me with the desperate hope of drowning men seeing a lifeboat. You have the floor, Ms. Coleman, one of the board members said quietly. Thank you, I said. My voice was not loud, but it filled the room. Let us skip the pleasantries. We all know why we are here. Caldwell Harbor Logistics is insolvent. Your credit lines are frozen. Your vendors have placed you on a cash-on-delivery basis. You cannot make payroll this Friday. I opened the portfolio. Hale Ridge Prestige, as the holder of your senior debt, has the right to foreclose on your assets immediately. I continued. We can seize the trucks. We can seize the warehouses. We can seize the accounts receivable. If we do that, this company ceases to exist by 5 o'clock today. Owen made a small, choking sound. However, I said, sliding a document across the polished table, I am not interested in a graveyard. I am interested in a restructuring. Everett spoke then. His voice was weak, a raspy wheeze, but the venom was still there. You want to steal my company, he spat. You manipulated the bank. You planned this. I did not plan your incompetence, Everett, I said, looking him in the eye. I merely prepared for the inevitable result of it. I pointed to the document. These are the terms, I said. Number 1, no mass layoffs of operational staff. The drivers, the warehouse workers, the dispatchers, and the administrative clerks, the people who actually do the work, keep their jobs. Their seniority is preserved. Their benefits are reinstated immediately. The board members nodded, relieved. They had expected a bloodbath. Number 2, I said, we are terminating the employment of all strategic consultants and creative directors who do not contribute to the movement of freight. That includes the entire Vibe curation team. I looked at Piper. She gasped. You can't do that, Piper shrieked. I am the chief operating officer. My name is on the door. Not anymore, I said. As of this morning, the position of COO is vacant. You are being removed for cause, specifically gross negligence regarding the Baltimore incident and the falsification of federal customs documents. I will sue you, Piper shouted, grabbing her phone. I will tell my followers. I will ruin you. Go ahead, I said coldly. Live stream it. Tell your 2 million followers that you lost your job because you let food rot while you were at a spa. See how that plays with the sponsors. Piper opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked around the room for support. Owen looked at the floor. Everett looked out the window. She realized, for the first time in her life, that her phone screen could not protect her from reality. She slumped back in her chair, defeated. Number 3, I continued, turning my attention to Everett. The return of intellectual property. I pulled out a separate file, the file Donovan had given me. For the last 2 months, this administration has systematically registered my work, my routing algorithms, my safety protocols, my training manuals, under the name of Piper Caldwell. It was a misunderstanding, Owen mumbled. Just paperwork. It was theft, I said. And it ends now. You will sign over the rights to all contested IP back to me, Mila Coleman. Furthermore, you will pay a retroactive licensing fee for the use of these systems during the last quarter. The fee is $1 million. We don't have $1 million, Everett shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You are trying to bleed us dry. Is this what this is about? Is this just revenge because I called you old? The room went silent. All eyes turned to me. I looked at the old man. I looked at the man who had taken 12 years of my life and dismissed them with a wave of his hand. Revenge? I asked softly. I walked over to the window. I looked down at the harbor, at the ships moving slowly across the gray water. If I wanted revenge, Everett, I would have let the bank foreclose. I would have let the FBI raid your office for the customs fraud. I would have let you die on that hospital bed knowing your legacy was dust. I turned back to face them. This is not revenge. This is correction. I am doing this for the truth, and I am doing this for every person in this industry that you chewed up and spit out because they didn't look the part. I am doing this for the people you called expired. I placed my hand on the table. You built a culture of exploitation and called it family, I said. That culture ends today. You sign the restructuring agreement, or I make the call to liquidate. You have 5 minutes. Everett stared at me. He looked at the papers. He looked at his son. He realized he had no moves left. The king was in checkmate, and the person moving the pieces was the pawn he had thrown away. With a shaking hand, Everett picked up the pen. He signed. As he signed, he looked smaller. The myth of the great industrialist evaporated, leaving just a bitter old man in a wheelchair. Done, Everett whispered. Good, I said. The restructuring team from Hale Ridge will arrive in 1 hour to take control of the accounts. I suggest you clear your personal effects. I picked up my portfolio and turned to leave. Mila, wait. It was Owen. He scrambled around the table, catching up to me near the door. He looked desperate. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he smelled of stale scotch and mints. Mila, please, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper so the others wouldn't hear. Can we talk? Just for a second? I stopped. We have nothing to talk about. Owen. We do, he said. Reaching out to touch my arm, I stepped back, and his hand fell to his side. Mila, I know I messed up. I know I was weak, but we were good together once, right? Before all this madness? He tried to smile. It was a pathetic, pleading smile. I can change, Owen said. With Piper gone, and Dad stepping down, it could be us again, you and me. We could run this together. I miss you. Mila, I miss my wife. I looked at him. I searched my heart for any flicker of emotion, any spark of the love I had once carried for this man. There was nothing, just a cold, clean emptiness. You miss your safety net. Owen, I said, you don't miss your wife. You miss the woman who fixed your mistakes and paid your bills. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a white envelope. These are divorce papers, I said. My lawyer drafted them this morning. I am not asking for alimony. I'm not asking for a share of your trust fund. I just want a clean break. Owen stared at the envelope. Divorce? But, Mila, where will I go? The company is restructuring. My salary is going to be cut. That is a problem for an entry-level employee, I said. But the house, Owen said, his eyes widening. We can at least keep the house, right? It is our home. I almost laughed. Of all the things he could have said, that was the most perfect. The house, I repeated. Yes, Owen said. The main line estate. We have so many memories there. Owen, I said, leaning in close. Do you remember when we bought that house? 10 years ago? Yeah, he nodded. We were so happy. I was happy, I corrected him. You were unemployed. You had just tanked your first startup, and your credit score was below 500. The bank wouldn't put you on the mortgage. Do you remember that? Owen blinked, confused. Yeah, but we fixed that later, right? No, I said. We never did. You were always too busy to sign the paperwork to add your name to the deed. You said it was just a formality. You said what was mine was yours. I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. It turns out, Owen, that in the eyes of the law, formalities matter. That house is 100% in my name. It is my separate property, purchased with my premarital savings and my inheritance from my grandmother. Owen's face went white. You can't be serious. I am very serious, I said. You have been living in my house as a guest for 10 years. And as the owner, I am revoking your invitation. You are kicking me out? He gasped. Where am I supposed to live? I hear the market for one-bedroom apartments is very competitive right now, I said. You should probably start looking. You have 30 days to vacate. I pressed the envelope into his chest. Goodbye, Owen. I turned and walked out of the boardroom. I did not look back. I did not need to see him crumbling. I knew exactly what he looked like. He looked like a man who had just realized that the ground he stood on was never his. I walked down the hallway. The portraits of the Caldwell ancestors seemed to glare at me, but I didn't care. They were just oil and canvas. I was flesh and blood and steel. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the noise of the collapsing dynasty. When I reached the lobby, the air felt different. It was lighter. The receptionists were whispering, but when they saw me, they stopped. They didn't look at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with respect. I walked out the front doors. The sun was shining. The storm that had started on New Year's Eve was finally over. The air was crisp and cold, smelling of the river and the city. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a message from Brenda Miller, the veteran customs broker I had hired for Hale Ridge. Notification. Shipment HR 409. Pharmaceutical cold chain. Client, Biotech Solutions. Status, cleared customs, delivered to warehouse. Temperature deviation, 0.0 degrees. Note, the client says thank you. They said it is the first time in 5 years the shipment arrived early. I smiled. No drama, no filters, no ring lights, just a job done right. I typed a reply. Good work, Brenda. Bonus approved. I put the phone away and walked toward the waiting car where Donovan and Juno were waiting. Juno rolled down the window, grinning. Did you get it? She asked. I got it all, I said, sliding into the seat. And Owen? Donovan asked, starting the engine. Owen is learning a very valuable lesson about real estate law, I said. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the Caldwell building behind in the rearview mirror, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in decades. They had called me too old. They had called me expired. They thought that because I had gray in my hair and lines on my face, I was finished. But they were wrong. Age is not an expiration date. Age is leverage. Age is the accumulation of data, the sharpening of instincts, and the hardening of resolve. Old isn't expired. Old is knowing exactly what is worth keeping and exactly what needs to be thrown in the trash. And today, I took out the trash. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed Mila's journey from being discarded to becoming the queen of her own empire. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from New York, London, Tokyo, or somewhere else? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Mila's final move. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Helena Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button so that this story can be recommended to more people who need a little inspiration. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next story.